retired professor of political science in the U.S. Naval Academy.
Hello, Connecticut. I am Tom Vance. I'm a professor at Kansas State University.
My name is Tom Tinder, and I'm an attorney from Charleston, West Virginia.
Would you please introduce yourselves?
Hello, I'm Samuel Powell from Staples High School in Westport, Connecticut.
My name is Gary Liu. I'm also from Staples High School in Westport, Connecticut.
My name is Will Matar, and I'm as well.
Very good. Let me read the question. In 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King said, quote, "Never in the history of this nation have so many been arrested for the cause of freedom and human dignity," unquote. What lessons can be learned from the Children's March in Birmingham, Alabama? What is civic engagement, and what is the significance of it in American history? What responsibility, if any, do schools have to promote civic engagement? You may begin.
May 2nd, 1963 commenced a week of revolt against the Southern white power complex with the hopes of bringing segregation to its knees. Referred to as the disinherited children of God by Martin Luther King Jr., the children braved police dogs, beatings, and fire hoses, shocking millions of Americans watching from the comfort of their own homes. In light of such atrocities, President John F. Kennedy declared just a month later that the events in Birmingham and elsewhere have so increased cries for equality that no city, state, or legislative body can prudently choose to ignore.
The Children's Crusade was of considerable risk for civil rights leadership, but they correctly understood that children, the innocent, hopeful, and undeterred, had the power to poke at the nation's conscience in a way that adults did not. James Bevel, a leader of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, proposed recruiting students, arguing that many adults may be reluctant to participate for fear of losing their jobs. He believed that children had less to lose and could, quote, subpoena the conscience of the nation to the judgment seat of morality.
These protests also reaffirmed the necessity of civil disobedience to uphold American democracy. Refusing to comply with morally unjust legislation is at the heart of this nation's identity. From the Boston Tea Party, the formation of labor unions, and the Kent State protests, civil disobedience has been integral to our collective attempt to perfect a flawed union. King offered encouragement to parents of the young protesters. Don't worry about your children, they're going to be all right. Don't hold them back if they want to go to jail, for they are doing a job for not only themselves, but for all of America and for all of mankind.
Civic engagement is aimed at addressing issues of public concern in order to improve one's community. Civic engagement has bound the people of this nation together from the beginning. Not race, religion, or ethnicity, but a shared idea of governance and individual liberties. Our great democratic experiment has always relied on civic engagement to ensure that the people have control.
In fact, civic engagement created this nation. During the Revolutionary War, men, women, and children did their part in their communities pushing for change, from protesting the intolerable acts to fighting on the open fields so that future generations could govern themselves. This freedom to protest and express ourselves was so crucial to the new Americans. They enumerated in the First Amendment.
As Alexis de Tocqueville observed, democracy works best when citizens have knowledge of how to combine and work together. Every landmark decision in our history, ending slavery, suffrage, or equal rights to marriage, was born from civic engagement. Yet in recent decades, fewer Americans are participating in civil institutions. Pew Research Center found a decline of roughly 26% in voluntary associations since the start of the 21st century.
Traditional methods of civic engagement have been increasingly cast aside, but Americans are more invested in our future than ever before, especially our youth. Young Americans are both this nation's most economically uncertain generation and its moral guardians, absent on the payroll, but present at the revolution.
With the advent of social media, classical civic engagement has morphed. Politics is now inescapable, providing a voice to more youth than ever before. The rise of hashtag Black Lives Matter, along with Me Too and MAGA, has exemplified the viability of using social media for political engagement and activism. Pew found that a majority of Americans believe that these sites are important for accomplishing a range of political goals, such as mobilizing for social change.
When sectors of society, such as religious groups, are not helping boost civic engagement, schools should fill the gap since they have the remarkable capacity to bring together youth with different backgrounds and perspectives, while instilling common lessons and values. School civics classes build a foundation for students to understand how the levers of government function, and have even been the breeding grounds for movements such as Never Again MSD. The everyday activities young people partake in have all been politicized. The food we eat, the sports we play, and campus security have become a hotbed for activism, as seen in the March for Our Lives protest and the transgender bathroom debate.
Developing civic-minded youth is a primary goal of education. In his farewell address, Washington recommended the creation of institutions for the general diffusion of knowledge, declaring that it is essential that public opinion be enlightened. In fact, the establishment of American public schools was the manifestation of Washington's vision. Education had civic purposes, and every teacher was a civics teacher. Thank you very much. We're ready for questioning.
Thank you very much. What is it in the Constitution that either promotes or perhaps thwarts civic engagement?
What makes America so unique from other human rights provisions or even other nations is the fact that we are the only nation with a constitution that protects and enumerates the right to protest and assemble and gather and speak out to advocate for change. And this protection is what facilitates so much civic engagement. America is known as the beacon of hope for free speech in this nation, compared to authoritarian nations such as China, where residents are often apolitical or too scared to speak out or detained for speaking out. America has so much more opportunity to promote change because citizens understand they have this right and duty to speak out.
In addition, the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment, since its addition into the United States Constitution, has allowed for many social groups, minorities who want to seek social change through civic engagement, the constitutional authority to act in such ways in which they can now, not only at the federal level guaranteed by the Fifth Amendment, but at the state level can seek protections that are guaranteed to them.
Are there any limits? Does our system of government provide any limits on civic engagement?
The judicial branch has held firm on its position on the state's ability to regulate civic engagement. In the Supreme Court case Cox v. New Hampshire, the Supreme Court ruled that the judiciary and the state cannot impose restrictions on the content of the speech, but could rather impose timely and locational restrictions on these protests in the name of the common good.
In the previous election, only 54% of Americans voted. That's frankly abhorrent. And however, we should not make voting mandatory like other countries have. What we should be doing is instead encouraging civic engagement. And we have a major flaw in this country, and that's that our election day is on a Tuesday. That forces people to choose between an economic choice, providing money and working their job for their family, or a political one. We need to encourage civic engagement by making voting not be on a Tuesday and instead on a weekend where everyone has the opportunity to be engaged in their community and exercise their freedom to vote.
Let's turn our attention to civil disobedience for a couple of minutes. Is civil disobedience always a justified form of engagement?
Civil disobedience is not always a justified form of engagement. Civil disobedience is only justified, as Martin Luther King Jr. outlined, when law is immoral. Just these past few weeks, protesters have gathered in the hundreds of thousands in Michigan and Wisconsin, protesting their governor's orders to stay at home, to close essential businesses, without respect to social distancing. Now, they have argued that they are trying to fight for the right to property. However, they are neglecting the common civic duty that every American should be participating in at this time, which is simply to stay home, to social distance, to squash the curve and ensure that the common good is protected and that public health is protected.
I think we should make the distinction, as outlined in Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail, the necessity for morality and within legislation. What the Nazis did in the Third Reich was legal, but was not moral. In addition to not only participating in the ways in the United States, but countries such as France and Thailand, in their constitutions, have put in the right to protest against the state and what they believe is unfair and unjust legislation.
What is the distinction between civil engagement and belonging to a group regardless of its purpose?
I think civic engagement differs from belonging to a group, let's say such as the ACLU. Civic engagement requires energy. Civic engagement requires a constant maintenance of your activities. While I personally and totally could belong to a club at a school, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm civically engaged in behalf of that club. I think there's a distinction to the requirements of both, especially when you're making a distinction between political and civic engagement.
Would, if civic engagement and civic education are really important. Would you support or oppose lowering the voting age to 16 in local elections?
I would only support lowering the voting age to 16 if we were able to establish a federally standardized civics curriculum for all 50 states, along with a civics test for high schoolers. It is important that in this time where there's so much concern about low voter turnout and about the knowledge of how the government works, that we build this foundation for students to understand how the government works before they participate in civic life, and so they can do this most effectively. Comparing our state of Connecticut, which does not even have a civics test requirement, to states such as Idaho, which mandates K through 12 civic education and the civics test at the end of high school, their methods are far more superior, from learning about trust, responsibility, and respect in first grade to the 3 different branches of government in 7th grade and taking that civics test. Now, opponents may argue the fact that the civics test may highlight inequality in education, but the purpose of this civics test is to ensure that you can take it as many times as possible. So when you do pass this test, it ensures you have that foundation necessary to most effectively create change. And when students are armed with this arsenal of knowledge of how government works, I think that is when we can lower the voting age so that students can create more change as 16-year-olds.
We need to take this even further. We need to take this even further as well. For example, in France, they have. Is time over?
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, I thought you had a very broad knowledge of all the issues that we brought up. You were able to pull things in. Your initial presentation was well honed, well stated, well informed. But I thought even more importantly, your follow-up question answers were well informed. You were able to draw things in, draw some facts in, draw some Supreme Court cases. And overall, I thought you did an excellent job.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And in particular, I was impressed with the comparative examples that you were able to draw upon, both in your prepared remarks as well as in follow-up questions. And you know, all of your responses were so thoughtful. You directly answered the question, which is point 1 to a good response and follow-up. And then you also were able to utilize reasoning and evidence to support your stances or positions. And really, that's what this whole enterprise is about. And so I thought it was just a really great example of kind of constitutional thinking. And you deserve a tremendous amount of credit, and your teacher deserves a tremendous amount of credit. That was an excellent performance.
Here's the best comment that I can make. I'm disappointed that we don't have an opportunity to go on and on with you longer. It was just superb. You just did an outstanding job, even to the point where you answered questions that we were going to ask you in your answers to other questions. It was as if you were reading our mind. You covered the entire gamut of this question, and you did it just superbly. Congratulations to you. And you all are to be highly commended, as well as your teacher and all your other students, for doing such an outstanding job during these extraordinary times. Good